clay road with red clay wings and a red clay halo for my head. I'll take a red clay road and a red clay wings and a red clay halo for my head.
From Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, for the last generation,
I'm
you have a choice.
the Republican
I
candidate
did
for governor.
not have sexual relations with
And I
that
realized that this is something
Miss
he is
Lewinsky.
We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Hey. Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to Backfire. John Stanberry, Franklin Chansey. Good morning to y'all.
Good morning.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, I believe we got a caller on the line this morning, first thing. Are we on there? Are you there, Jeff?
I can barely hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That's right.
I'm going to hang up and call back in.
All right, go ahead. He said he can barely hear us. He's going to hang up and call back in. All right, we got Jeff Yarber on the phone. We want to talk a little bit about these dogs and cats first thing this morning. He couldn't come in for a meeting he already had planned, but he gave us a call. Anyway, been an exciting week. Here he is. Go ahead, Jeff. You live?
How are you doing?
Doing good. Good to have you. I'm sorry you couldn't come in live this morning, but I'm glad that you were able to call in. Tell us what's going on with these dogs and cats. Every time we get around, every time we pull out the banner, that seems to be a big source of information there, the banner and the dogs and cats.
Steve, it depends on who you talk to, what's going on. Some would say all is well and nothing's wrong. I say we made a mistake. It's going to cost us more in the long run. You know, they've now been started discussing if we want stray animal pickup or not. The sheriff's department has said the pickup alone is going to cost us in excess of $200,000, not counting what we're already paying. That puts us right back to where we're at, and that would be for part-time pickup. That puts us right back to where we were. The offer I made to the city, if the commission would approve it, would have been $280,000. I believe we could still do a contract with the city for between $240 and $280, somewhere around in there, and not have to try to reinvent the wheel.
Let me ask a question. When this contract was negotiated to start with, was pickup not part of, were they not picking up the strays at that time?
You know, they keep saying that in the contract it doesn't cost that. It costs for emergency pickup. There's a lot of things talked about and a lot of things promised on the front end, such as that they were going to raise their own money. The county was going to put in $80,000. They were going to raise then their own funds to help offset that. There was supposed to be vehicles put in place and people put in place to go pick up the stray animals. And what I've said is, when we were sold the bill of goods, we were sold that we could do it just as good as the city, cheaper. That what the city was doing was costing us too much money. Well, now we're not comparing apples to apples. We aren't getting, the taxpayers are still paying the same amount of taxes for less service. Now, if you have a stray, and here's the thing, there's a big dog in my yard. I've got a 9-year-old daughter. Do I send her out to see if it's a vicious dog or not, or do I assume it is? And so unless it's a vicious dog, now they say that they don't have anything, they don't come out and do anything with it. If they do, the sheriff's department has to be involved.
Well, it just seems like it's a never-ending thing, which is taking up. If you took the commissioner's time and put a dollar value to the time that you spend on this project, you'd really be in the hole. And somehow the city and the county needs to come together and nip this in the butt. What's the city doing about their services now that the county's off on their own?
Well, they've had to scale back. They still have full-time pickup, and it's still business as usual from what I understand over there. They've had to scale back and move a couple of guys into other positions. But I mean, it's still business as usual.
This all started when they wanted to go to 4 employees, right?
No, that's not my business. What it started over was some of the commissioners said we were paying $340,000 a year, and some of the commissioners said that was too expensive, and it probably was, because they were willing to negotiate down to $280,000. But here's the thing: we have some commissioners who say, well, the money we're giving the city, the way they're spending the money, we don't like. And what I say to that is, if I buy a service, it's not my job to tell that entity how to spend their money. If Steve, if you're going to sell me a donut, and you say, Jeff, I'll give me $10 for the donut, and it's worth $1, and I say, okay, is it your fault you charged me $10, or is it my fault I paid you $10? And then it's not my job to tell you how to spend your money.
So where do you think this thing's headed?
I have a feeling, Steve. I mean, there's more and more commissioners. I've not changed my ideology on it from the get-go. I don't think I'm not for duplication of services ever. Other commissioners are starting to see and realize, some of the newer commissioners who were handed the quagmire are starting to, see that something needs to be done. My hope is at some point in time we come back to the city and we say, hey guys, let's work this out, and let's have a working relationship again like we had before.
Well, Jeff, first of all, I commend you for explaining the issue in a way that makes sense. The bottom line, as I understand it, is that the county had an opportunity to save $40,000 to $60,000 from the previous contract with the city and still have the same amount of services. It now appears that we're paying at least that amount of money now in one form or another, whether it's to the sheriff's department or to the SPCA, and arguably getting less service. Is that fair?
That's fair, because even right now with no animal pickup, the sheriff's department says it's answering between 20 to 21 calls a week on animals. So we're having to pay those officers to go out to handle animal issues when they should be doing other things. So yeah, even right now, it's cost. There's a lot of hidden cost we don't see. But yes, if we go with straight animal pickup, we'll be paying as much or more for part-time service when we can pay that amount of money for full-time in the city. You're exactly right, Franklin.
Jeff, it seems to me we've done this before. When we did the fire department deal, everybody was going, oh, it costs too much, it costs too much. And when you turned around and asked them, well, how much is it going to cost to set up our own department? They said, well, I don't know. Well, if you don't know how much it's going to cost to go out on your own, then you don't know whether it costs too much to stay with the contract you had. And that's the same thing it looks like we did here. We got a bunch of people that were able to make a claim that probably sounded good on the surface. Oh, we're going to save you some money. It costs too much, without any clue as to what it was going to actually cost to provide that service.
I call it a knee-jerk reaction. I felt like this was a knee-jerk reaction. What happened, if you remember, John, and you're exactly right, what happened was, with the way animal control completely, people started, getting up in their arms. We did a 3-month Band-Aid contract with the city for $20,000 a month, and then threw this together rather than sitting back and if we want to break off, actually doing some studies, do it for a year, pay the city, and then see if it's even feasible. And I like to use the old analogy sometimes, and I say this a lot. Sometimes you think you're mixing common sense and politics, and the two don't always go together.
Well, I wish we'd look at the fire contract a little bit. It amazes me that, as I understand it, the first 2 fire trucks we ordered came in $200,000 over what we were told they were going to cost. And it frustrates me when government does things and then is not held accountable for either misstatements that they make or mistakes that they make.
I understand that. Yeah, and we've got to be more efficient. We've
got to be more open too and honest. If you screw up, admit you screwed up.
That's what I said. We all know that I've made some mistakes in my life, and I've always had to come back and just say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Because that's what I've tried to tell the commission this time. If you just, people don't mind, to say, hey, this is a good idea gone bad. We thought we could make it work and we can't. So let's back up and punt and see where we need to go.
I think you're right. I think that it seemed like a lot, and to think about that many stray animals paying that kind of price, I don't know how much that would be per animal. But when you really put the numbers to it, it's something that you try to figure out whether you just want to just give them an extra ammunition and let them go take care of it, or if you're going to take care. I know I'm going to get a bunch of calls on that one, but you know, there's a point in time. Maybe it ought to be that anybody who has a pet has to come register it and pay a fee on the front end. Then anything found on the side of the road other than that, we got to tie it back into to somebody who owns it.
Well, look, you've got, for example, the Caring Place does a wonderful job helping people that are really down on their luck in this community. What's more important, helping a human being or helping the animals? And I know I'll get fussed at too, but there are priorities in the world, and there are a set amount of resources and money. And you have to decide, where is my money most important to go to? Now, I agree, and I think we ought to compliment Jeff. Jeff, from the get-go, even though, you know, you get this us and them, county versus city thing going, Jeff was looking at the bottom line, I feel like, and going, look, folks, we may need to negotiate. We may need to smack the city in the head a little bit and say, hey, you're trying to charge us too much here. But ultimately, the right thing to do was to stay with one provider and not have a duplication of services. And I think he's being proven that he had the right position from the start.
I think that if you had a service in place, if you worked together to try to come up with a reduced cost or the best price, would be the best way to try to work with it than trying to get in an uproar and trying to say, well, we'll just do our own. We'll do our own. It's a service that both city and county, which we are all one of, need. So why can't we work together?
That's the thing. 80% of my district is in the city, so any decision I make that affects the city affects my constituents as well. And we tend to get in this mentality, instead of sitting down and trying to truly talk, of just, well, I'll take my ball and go home. And that gets us in a lot of the messes we're in, and then we have to come back. You know, and I always say, sometimes we create a 100-year mess with a 15-minute decision. And we don't need to do that. You know, I mean, we need to be more efficient. I respect every commissioner up there and every city council person that's serving. I commend them for serving. I think sometimes we need to let our pride go to the wayside.
Well, I think that's right, Jeff. I mean, not a week, or at least 2 weeks, was going by here for 2 years that there wasn't a positive article praising the work that was being done in animal control in this community. I don't think we've heard a positive word since then.
I agree.
Well, listen, Jeff, thanks for calling in. I know you got a meeting here in a few minutes, but we wanted to, I wanted to try to talk with someone about this morning. It's just going on, and I appreciate your input.
Well, I appreciate you guys as always. You know that. Thanks for letting me call in.
All right,
Thanks,
Jeff. Thank you. Thanks. All right. Now then, we'll get back with the other local stuff. What about Volkswagen? Let's get into Volkswagen real quick. They're pushing the bubble on the union again.
What, isn't there a process to how this works? And don't people believe in abiding by the process? And I believe the process functioned, and one side lost and one side won. And then, as I understood the process, you weren't supposed to be doing anything for at least, what was it, another year?
That's what I thought.
But apparently in the liberal mindset, if I don't get what I want, just like the Obamacare architect, it's okay to lie to people. It's okay to bend the rules because I'm smarter than you and I should have what I want.
I just don't understand why this union can't fade away for a year until they...
You mean why they can't follow the federal rules?
Yeah, I guess.
Maybe I'm missing something in the article about what's happening here, but it's my understanding that Volkswagen is doing something
because
this week.
Volkswagen has 10 people on the board that are company people and 10 people on the board that are union people. So you're right, Franklin.
So does that mean
They're
some of the
union
company
buddies.
people then are going along?
No,
with
they're basically afraid of the union people because they do things like threaten people.
Now,
like, for example,
is it the American Council of Employees? Is that what I think?
No, that's an opposition group.
Well, Franklin, let me ask you another question. I belong to the American Dental Association. Would you support the Congress passing a law that says insurance companies can only pay and work with dentists who belong to the American Dental Association?
Yes.
Now, not all dentists belong to that.
Yes,
so, would you
would.
support a law forcing insurance companies to only work with dentists who belong to the American Dental Association?
Probably not. No.
Well, then explain to me why Congress passed a law saying that any kind of works council had to be the United Auto Workers.
Well, you'll have to ask the Democratic
liberal
and
Democrats who
Republican
passed
members of the
that.
Congress
No,
who passed.
it was the liberal Democrats in the 1970s that passed
John,
that.
if you're telling me that a bunch of Republicans didn't vote for that, I'm calling you out.
Well,
on that
here's
one.
the deal, Franklin. If they did, I'm glad they're out of Congress,
Well,
and I'm glad
maybe they
they're
are,
gone,
maybe
'cause
they're
unlike
not.
You,
Maybe they just finally
I'm basing
died,
my
but-
beliefs on principle, and the principle here is you shouldn't have favored classes. But that's what
But I
progressives
don't
believe
see,
in. Government
I still
helps
don't see
favored
what that
classes.
has anything to do with what
Because
Volkswagen
if that
chooses
law
to
hadn't
do.
been passed, we would have already had a works council. It wouldn't have been involving the UAW, and this would be a moot point.
John, in your conservative soul, do you not agree that Volkswagen can do what it wants to do?
Yeah, I can believe
Okay.
it
Well,
can.
then this
but
is the only
here's the
argument
deal,
then.
Franklin. If government hadn't passed a law requiring a works council to be a union group,
Well,
then
now you
Volkswagen could have done.
Now you have Republican majorities,
I hope
and you
we'll
can change
I
this,
hope
can't
we'll
you?
repeal it. But Volkswagen probably will have already cut their own throat by allowing the UAW into Chattanooga.
Why
by
do you
that
think
point.
UAW's pushing so hard?
Because they're a dying breed, and the only way they can win is by having government, their big liberal buddies in Washington, cram them down our throats.
Before we get it changed, before we can get things changed.
Absolutely.
Another cram down our throat process.
Yeah, well, I saw this in the paper yesterday. I thought this was fascinating. The top 5 states in the nation for filing for bankruptcy by people.
Oh, yeah, we're number one. aren't
Number
we?
1. Who's number 2? Alabama.
Uh-huh.
3, Georgia. 4, Indiana. 5, Utah. What do all 5 of those states have in common?
I'll tell you. You want me-
Dominated by Republicans.
You want me to tell you? They can file bankruptcy for $1,000 because there'll be an attorney to take it for them.
You think they won't do that in these other states?
No, I think there's limits
Why
to what
those
they can
5?
file.
Actually,
I
other
think there's
states have
dollar
limits.
limits
That's a
that they can
federal
file.
law. It's not a state law. The point is,
What
the
are the
economic
guidelines? What are the
policies
guidelines
being-
for filing bankruptcy?
Well, according to the federal bankruptcy law, you have to. First of all, there's 2 kinds of bankruptcies.
Okay.
Number 1.
All right.
One, you have to show that your assets are insufficient to pay the debts.
Which type of bankruptcy are they referring to? There's 2 kinds.
Those are
you said.
7s and 13s combined.
Okay.
Yeah. The point is, though, all 5 of those are Republican-dominated
You know,
states.
I'm glad you brought that up because that brings us into another thing. The liberals for the last 2 weeks have been uniformly saying politics in America is dysfunctional. This was not a repudiation of Obama's policies and certainly not a repudiation of liberal policies. Well, you know what? Here's the problem with that. They say, oh, people don't like Congress. This was a vote against Congress. It wasn't a vote against policies. Well, the problem is that doesn't explain why Democrats lost their majorities in the West Virginia House, the Nevada Assembly and Senate, New Hampshire House, Minnesota House, New York Senate, Maine Senate, Colorado Senate, Washington Senate, New Mexico House. The Republicans increased their number of state legislative chambers with majorities from 57 to 67 out of a total of 99. Now, none of that has anything to do with Washington. That has to do with policy. So, Franklin, your liberal policies are being voted out at the national level and at the state level with huge margins. You all are at your lowest majority since, I believe, 1935. So don't tell me it's not about your policies. And by the way,
I didn't say any. I
it
didn't
would
make that
help
statement.
if you could keep a president a week before the election from saying my policies are definitely on the ballot. Those are my policies. And then when he gets the crap beat out of him, turning around and going, well, it wasn't about my policies. It wasn't about me.
Well, what the president can legitimately say is that he was directly on the ballot and the American people voted for him a second time.
You know, that's amazing, too. I'm glad you
That's
brought
true.
that up, Franklin. So the
What, are you
president
gonna
comes
dispute
out
that
and
point?
insults our intelligence by saying, I heard the 1/3 of the electorate that voted,
Mm-hmm.
but I also heard the 2/3 of the electorate that didn't vote.
Mm-hmm.
You think that's a reasonable statement on his part, correct?
I think what he was saying is that the lack of participation is a sign of the disgust with the way Washington works.
All right, let me ask you a question, Franklin.
And
You
that cuts across both parties.
You
That's not-
defend criminal defendants, correctly?
Sure, I
Correct?
do.
So when the district attorney goes into the courtroom and says, you know, this murder happened in a neighborhood with 100 residents living in the neighborhood. Now, we don't have a witness, But we're sure out of those 100 people, several of them saw the defendant commit this crime. So just take our word for it. Even though we don't have a witness, we don't have a statement from any of these people, we know that that's what they saw. So we want to enter that into court. Would you allow that to be entered into court as evidence? I'm assuming that that's a no. But yet the president can go on national TV and he can claim
it's a statement
nobody
that has
voted,
no meaning.
nobody said anything, but I know what they believe, so please accept my interpretation of what they said. I'm waiting for you to accept that kind of evidence on the district attorney's part in court. Would you do that? We don't have a statement. We don't have a witness, but we know what they saw.
Holder says that Ferguson
I
needs
think it's
change.
unlikely that ever comes to court, but okay, all right.
It's ridiculous on its face, and it was an insult to the American people.
John,
what the president
when the
said.
president gets out of bed in the morning,
It was
you think
an
it's an
insult
insult
to the American people what he said. He should have said, like Bush did. Bush said, you know what? We got beat. We got beat. Obviously, the people weren't happy with what we were doing. We got beat. And that's what he should have said.
All right.
But he is a ideologue, and he's an egotistical maniac type ego that can't admit he lost.
I was going to wait a little while before I did this, but put on your headsets. I'm going to play something for you. It's about a 1 minute segment here. All right.
You can't do it politically. You just literally cannot do it. Okay? Transparent financing, unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes.
We're talking
if
about
CBO scored the
Obamacare.
mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay? So it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay? Just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We can make it all transparent. But I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. There's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
This is Obama architect Jonathan Gruber, who helped invent Obamacare.
He was one of their experts.
That's right.
He was hailed as one of a completely nonpartisan, impartial expert.
What do you think about this guy coming out and saying this?
Well, I think that he probably said something that is tragically true.
That they lied to the American people and counted on us being stupid. And you think that's acceptable?
First of all, and I appreciate
it's something they all feel that we needed, but we need to be lied to
I
get
appreciate you playing the 1 minute of it. There's actually a much bigger segment.
It doesn't get any better, I can assure you.
I'm not defending it. But I am telling you what the context of what they were talking about.
You understand how many times he met with the White House? You understand how many times he was sent out as their expert on this issue? You also understand that I brought him up, I think back in the spring when previous videos surfaced. First, he went on the news recently and said that they never intended for the rebates or the subsidies to only be paid to states that set up an exchange. Then someone unearthed footage and video footage again of him at a conference saying, absolutely, we wrote it that way, and if you don't set up an exchange, you're not going to get the subsidies. So we had video evidence of him lying directly about this bill, and he said, well, I only said it that one time. And then a video came up where he said it a second time and a third time. Oh, no, by the way, all your good liberals, Franklin, that are so wonderful and honest, the University of Pennsylvania, where this most recent debate actually occurred, pulled the video off of their service. Now, it was a public meeting, publicly available, and once it hit that he had said this, they removed the video. Now, I think they have subsequently, after a day or two of having it down, they did put it back up because there was such a backlash to how can you pull this down simply because you don't like that it doesn't look good for you.
Anyway, I think Obamacare is starting to cost more money now. It's coming out.
Well, actually, the CBO has just lowered the expectations again. This year, they have now lowered the enrollment from 13 million to just 9.9 million. They just did that this past week.
Well, I'm looking here at the city of Cleveland, just going over their insurance plans, and for a single party, it's $152 more. For a family, it's $380 more. That's a small I mean, that's something small to look at in comparison, but if you look at it,
Franklin, what do you think about him saying we were relying on the stupidity of the American voters?
I think that's a horrible statement. I think it's probably a true statement, but I think it's a horrible comment on the way our system functions. Yeah.
Well, not our system.
No, it is.
This White House, this administration.
No, it's not, John. And
Franklin, is that this administration or not? Now,
no, it's not this administration. It's a consultant.
This guy was the administration's point man on this. And what he said was by the way, Obama himself hosted a meeting in the Oval Office with this guy putting the policy together. So when he says we were counting on the stupidity of the American people, we decided not to be transparent. Who do you think he's referring to when he says we?
Okay, John.
The president and the president's
John,
people.
I don't care. Basically, I don't care.
You don't care that the president effectively this is an admission that they lied to us from the get-go.
No, John,
they
I
knew
don't
they were
I
lying,
don't care.
and they counted on not getting caught.
I don't care when a president came forward with a plan to address a crisis in America and got no partner. I don't care.
No, wait a minute, Franklin.
I
got
don't
no
care.
partner.
No,
they closed the doors.
How many Republicans voted on this?
None. Not a single Republican. Because guess what? Harry Reid changed the rules to the Senate.
Steve.
Changed the rules.
Why it is that a plan that's modeled on Republican ideas didn't get a Republican
Franklin,
vote?
if it was modeled on Republican ideas, then why didn't they allow us into any of the meetings crafting it?
Yeah.
They were participants. They locked the doors, Franklin, and did it by themselves.
John,
and Harry Reid had to change the rules to the Senate.
You've completely forgotten that there was a big group of about 10 that were working on this plan.
He changed
that had
the
Republicans
rules to
involved.
the Senate. No, it didn't, Franklin. They actually closed the committee doors. They closed the doors. Nancy Pelosi came out and said, we don't even know what's in it. You got to pass it before you can read it.
You skip over the whole year of debate that went into that.
There was no debate.
You're wrong.
Franklin?
You're wrong.
Harry Reid actually changed the rules of the Senate to get it to pass. Are you okay with changing the rules?
You've forgotten the entire year of commentary, public hearings.
That we were against it.
Y'all were against everything.
I'm sorry, Franklin. That's the way divided government works. One side's for one thing.
John.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not
worked
how
that
it's
way for hundreds of
worked.
years.
No,
but what
it
happens
hasn't,
is
John.
when liberals don't get their way, then they think it's okay to lie.
That is not how it's worked, John.
This guy, all he did was open the door to the liberal mindset. We're smarter than you, so it's okay for us to lie to you.
What he
too
did
stupid
was
to
paint
know
the
what's best for
Republican
you.
Party as the hypocrites they've demonstrated themselves.
So let me
to
see
be.
if I got this straight.
The
They lied
president
to
comes
us.
out
They
with a
were
plan.
not transparent.
Comes out with a plan based upon Republican ideals, and then you have the nerve to call him
if it
not
was
bipartisan.
Republican ideals, then we could have participated in the crafting of the bill.
That's right.
You chose not to.
No, you all locked
You
us out.
chose not
Franklin,
to.
they actually literally
You
locked the
chose
Republicans
not
out.
to.
They literally locked them out, folks.
Why was the doors locked, Franklin?
He's referring to a committee there the last few days before
that was
the
crafting
debate.
the final
Not
version
the
of the
whole
bill.
year
That
worth
was
of
crafting
participation
the
they had
final
before that.
version of the bill,
A
Franklin.
whole year worth.
The final and Harry Reid had to change the rules of the Senate to get it passed. Are you okay with that?
I am okay with what came out of it.
Because you wanted it. That's it, folks.
And I'm
They
okay.
kept-
And
Now,
I'm okay
Franklin
with.
is
And I'm
in agreement
okay
with
and I'm
this
okay
guy
with
that
an
you're too
honest
dumb
effort
to make a good
improvements
decision.
To it.
So,
when are your party going to do that?
well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan are preparing an alternative Obamacare
Great.
proposal.
That's
right
what they
as we
said
speak.
last year
By
and the year
way,
before
Franklin,
that and the year
Marco
before that
Rubio
and the year
was
before
preparing
that.
an immigration bill,
Great,
and the
do
president torpedoed
Do
him
it.
and took his legs
Do
out
it.
from under him because
Do
it's more
it.
important for you all to win than it is to accomplish anything.
It's more important for you people to just talk than to do something.
well, actually,
You
Franklin,
haven't done a darn thing.
Well,
do something.
I'm glad
Who's
you
gonna
brought
pay
that
for
up,
it?
too? Because let me.
All of us are. And
All
guess
of us.
what?
Okay.
Guess what?
All right.
We
We're
are-
all going to pay for it.
Here's the problem.
And half of the
No,
stupid
no.
ones don't have to pay for it, so
look
don't
at-
worry
let's
about
look
it.
at this morning what we were talking about. We also pay for not doing anything.
All right,
and
Franklin,
that's what we're
I'm
talking
glad
about
you brought
here.
that up because we talked about this last week. There are 356 bills that made it through the House and are languishing on Harry Reid's desk in the Senate. Now, here's the great great part about that 356 bills. 98% of those bills were passed with bipartisan support. Over 200 of the 356.
You mean like the Senate
Franklin,
immigration
listen
bill
to me.
that passed?
Over 200 of the bills were passed in the House with unanimous support from the entire chamber, and more than 100 were passed with 75% of House Democrat support. So you have over 40 of those bills directly relate to job creation, growth, and retention. So the House Republicans, with the cooperation of House Democrats, passed 356 bills that Harry Reid has refused to bring to the floor of the Senate. So when you say the system's broken, it was fixed Tuesday night, 2 weeks ago, when Harry Reid was voted out of his seat.
We'll see. When's the House bringing up the immigration bill?
Actually, Marco Rubio was putting a bill together, and the president killed it.
When are they going to do it?
Wait a minute. We're going to talk about that, but let's take a break first.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash.
Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500.
At Check Into Cash, you get the most for your car, and we make it quick, easy, and confidential.
Stop in for an auto title loan today or a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH.
Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Guns, guns, and more guns. That's right, folks. U.S. Money Shops has just received a large shipment of pre-owned Glock 22s, 23s, and the awesome Beretta 8040D Cougar. These guns are law enforcement trade-ins that start at just $379.99 while supplies last. At U.S. Money Shops, there's no shortage of guns, so if you're looking for a great deal on a newer pre-owned gun, then check us out first.
Buy or sell or buy today, the better way at U.S. Money Shops.
Visit usmoneyshops.com for the location nearest you.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
Coach to Coach is sponsored by two great Cleveland, Tennessee institutions. Check Into Cash, founded in 1993, the pioneer of payday advances, and Hardwick Clothes, founded in 1880. Visit checkintocash.com to explore our micro-lending products, including installment and title loans. Hardwick.com, America's oldest tailored clothing maker, offers made-in-America quality suits and blazers. Visit us online and support two Tennessee legends.
Hello, my name is Andy Figglestaller with Ed Jacobs & Associates. We are an employee benefit and insurance broker in business for the past 20 years. The new healthcare law, also known as Obamacare, has finally arrived. The law is complex and the choices are confusing. You have questions, we have the answers. It is our passion to find cost-effective solutions for every client. The solutions will be different for every person or business. Let our knowledge, experience, and passion go to work for you. Contact us today and let us assist you through this process. Our phone number is 423-473-0202, or you can find us on the web at edjacobs.com.
Dr. Christopher Chase, with Associates in Plastic Surgery, now offers his patients the convenience of a Cleveland office at 2350 North Ocoee Street. Dr. Chase specializes for the ladies in breast augmentation, including lifts, reconstructions, and reductions, also tummy tucks or mommy makeovers, and facial rejuvenation, including facelifts, eyelids, brows, nose, and he also offers Botox procedures. Check out Dr. Christopher Chase. He is certified by the American Board of Surgery, the American Board of Plastic Surgery. He's a member of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons and the American Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery. Check their website out at aprs.md. That's aprs.md. Call for your convenient appointment in Cleveland at 624-0021. 624-0021. 2350 North Ocoee. That's Dr. Christopher Chase.
If you're looking for a home, apartment, or office space, Jones Properties provides residential and commercial properties in the heart of the Southeast that will fulfill any need. Plus, Jones Properties is one of the fastest growing firms in the area, which offers you more security. When you're ready for a home, apartment, or in need for commercial office space, it makes sense to call Jones Properties first at 472-4000. Plus, you can get additional information by logging on to the website at www.jonesproperties.biz. Jones Properties is also looking to invest in properties. So if you have a property that you need to sell, call the professional team at Jones Properties first. They'll help you find the perfect property for whatever your needs. Call today, 472-4000. And don't forget to keep up with Jones Properties on Facebook.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
All right. Okay, we're back and we're live and everybody's calmed down. Come on back into the ring, boys. Let's go. Anyway, you want to talk about immigration, what we're going to do about immigration. Everything I've read is that the Republicans are really working hard trying to put together something for immigration before Mr. Obama
Marco
uses
Rubio
it.
had a plan,
before he
almost
uses
ready
ink
to
pen.
announce it, and the president cut his legs out from under him 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what everybody forgets is that the president had a plan, and
What
the
is it?
Republican administration, the Republicans said, please don't introduce it. We won't be able to get anything passed if you introduce it. So he didn't introduce anything. All right. He let that process work out. What happened? Nothing. Nothing happened.
Franklin, it worked. Our government works the way it works. And Marco Rubio had said, I'm putting forward a plan. And he was actually a leader on the Republican side in immigration. And the president actually probably was afraid he might run against him in the re-election race, cut his legs out from under him and announced a plan. You've got just this past week, John Boehner asked the president, please don't go unilateral on this. And the vice president, who I'm not, prone to brag on a lot, the vice president actually, because he's a creature of the Senate and he's a creature of how the Senate and the House work, he tried to be reasonable and said, well, how much time do you need? And according to reports, the president angrily cut Biden off and said, I'm done. We're not giving them any more time.
Let me ask a question. The election that just took place, was a lot of it not, a lot of the votes that came out, was it not because of immigration issues?
Actually, immigration is about third or fourth on people's list. They're really more worried about their jobs. It's not. That's another reason that all of this is somewhat of a false issue.
Well, it's not a false
It
issue.
is
Hold on.
The importance that the president is assigning.
The Senate passed an immigration bill, but guess what? It had 13 Republican votes for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it passed with something like 64 votes out of 100. Pretty good. That's pretty bipartisan. All right. Never came up in the
Actually,
House.
it's 64%, which is not particularly bipartisan. But
I'm
go
gonna,
ahead.
I'm going to ask a.
Well, it is when the that's
Here's
a
the
lot
deal,
of
Frank.
Republican support.
I
for
will
a bill.
give you that if you want to say that passed out of the Senate and why didn't the House bring it up, I'll give you that. There's a lot of politics involved, but you're not going to give me the 354 bills passed in the House.
I will give you that if what you will
1 to 354.
No, that's not the only one, but that's not the point. The point is, the whole system is so polarized that it's broken.
Well, let me ask you a question, Franklin.
I mean, I
Had you
think
all
everybody
retained the
agrees on that.
majority or increased your majority in the House, would any of you liberals be saying that the system is broken? Of course not. It's only broken when we win. It's not broken when you win.
Oh, no, it was broken when we had both houses.
Well, why didn't you pass it when you had both houses, now that you bring that up?
We should have.
Well, you should. If you'd have done
We
it, it'd
should
have been
have.
a done deal, wouldn't it?
We should have.
So whose fault is it ultimately?
We
It's
should
Harry
have.
Reid's, Nancy Pelosi's, and Barack Obama's.
But actually, majorities of both. This is where you get frustrated, and this is why I say this. And immigration's probably the easiest example to use. There is a majority in both houses of Congress who support these plans. We can't get a vote.
Well, actually, when you have the
There is a
Speaker of the
majority.
House say, give us a little bit of time and we'll have a vote, and the President cuts him off and
How
says,
many
nope, not
years
going to
does
do
it
it.
take? Waited
long enough.
I don't know, Franklin. It takes
That's
years
the
to do
point.
something.
That's the point.
All right.
Do something.
All right. let me ask you something. I'm going to do something.
You do
different
realize
this
what
morning.
Obama's going to do is a violation of the Constitution?
No, it's not.
Actually, the liberals
No,
are saying it's going to be a violation of the
No, it's
Constitution.
not.
The New York Times has said it.
No.
Anyway, let's talk about this. What do you think needs to happen with immigration? Then I want to ask John what he thinks needs to happen with the immigration.
Well,
all you got to do is set the parameters for it and put it in place, right?
I think there's a bill there to be had. Hold on.
Let me
Put
it on 5 fingers on one hand. What we know to do.
All right. First of all, I think the president, as part of an overall immigration reform bill, will support the border security that the Republicans want. I don't think there's a question about that.
Now, wait a minute.
No.
That'd be partly the fence that we already agreed to that the Democrat Congress wouldn't fund.
I think.
Even though it was voted
What did
through.
I just say, John?
My point is, Franklin, we passed
What did
another
I
bill
just
and
say?
the Democrats didn't follow through.
Because you won't address the big problems.
Okay, what is the big
Okay.
problem?
Number 2.
The big problem are the illegals that are here now.
They're
What
not
do we do with
illegals. They're not illegals.
That's
Don't
what
call
we,
them
no,
that.
wait a minute. He disagreed with me. The big problem is the illegals that we have here currently. What are we going to do with them, right?
Second of all,
Okay.
next part of it, which I think there's bipartisan support for, is what's called the Dreamers. All right. Those are people who were born here, essentially, or brought here by parents.
Illegally.
Illegally, okay? But brought here and have spent their whole lives here.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense to kick out these essentially
Didn't we
people who
say
think
the same thing in the 80s?
No, we didn't.
Yeah, we did.
That
We
was not
talked
part of the
about
legislation.
all the people in the 80s that had
Well, let's
came
talk
here.
about how we're going to fix it now.
That's my point, John. You can't get off this.
You didn't fix it.
We didn't fix it.
The
Not-
Democrats were in
not
control in the
we- not the
80s. You
Democrats.
made agreements
We
to
didn't fix
secure
it.
the border if we would allow basically amnesty. We, the Republicans, agreed to the amnesty end, and the Democrats did not follow through on the secure the border end. So excuse me if we're doubtful of you all's sincerity.
Who was in charge of the border in the 80s?
Actually, Congress was in charge of funding the fences that were voted through. Reagan was in charge, and I guess he did the best he could, but the Democrats never kept their end of the bargain.
Reagan making a big deal about fences in the 80s.
Actually, it was
He
passed
didn't.
in the 80s to start fencing.
It's because
the
it wasn't
border.
a big deal to him. That's a fact.
Well, the China Wall came down.
It's also yeah. Well, that's true. It's also the fact, and I assume you meant the Berlin Wall. But,
Yeah,
I'm
sorry, the Berlin Wall, the China Wall.
I think that one's still standing.
Obama's meeting with China right now, about to screw up that deal.
Well, I wonder if he's got chewing gum in.
Keep going.
Most people would agree that we shouldn't be kicking people out of the country as soon as they
And
graduate
you
from
base
college
that on
with a
what?
high-tech degree.
Franklin, here's the problem with all of this. We have dealt with this over and over and over again, and the liberal side always wins this argument that we can't deport everybody, and that's probably actually functionally correct. We can't deport everybody. We shouldn't deport these kids. We shouldn't deport this group or this group or this group. And the Republicans end up going along and saying, okay, but let's stop it at this point. Let's deal with what's here, but let's not let the problem get any bigger. The problem is the liberals never follow through on stopping it from getting any bigger.
And what happens when we had this debate? The only thing the conservatives want to talk about is deportation and border security.
We want to stop the flow from continuing.
Okay. I've just told you I think the votes are there on the Democratic side to strengthen border security like you wanted to. Now, what are you going to do in response to that to get something done?
John, I tell you what, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm going to ask you the same question. How far do we have to go back with allowing the illegals to stay here to be able to get this done? We're going to have to bite that bullet to make everybody happy.
Problems, but we can't even identify how many are here. So one of the problems for what Republicans.
How about anybody who's been here 10 years or more can't speak English goes back? Let's start somewhere.
Well, one thing we could do is we could quit actually making it easier for them. This idea that English is not really the language of the land. Let's make sure our schools spend resources teaching in Spanish rather than saying English is the language of the land. You want to be here, learn English. There are things we could do that would actually make it less attractive for these masses to come over. My argument to Franklin has always been the same. The reason we're talking about Mexicans and we're talking about Hondurans and Guatemalans is because of the proximity at the border. Would you allow these same policies to be in place if 747s from China started flying immigrants from China here, or from Brazil, or from the Ukraine? Are we going to allow we're only talking about it down there, and we're only talking about a certain amount because we're talking about who can physically walk to the border. What if this was happening through mechanical means from countries all over the world? We simply can't allow everyone who wants to come to this country to just walk in.
Well, first of all, that's one of the problems with this argument.
We have a caller.
The 12 million immigrants who are here.
Hold on, caller. We're coming.
They're not all people who walked across the border. A lot of them were trucked in to actually work here.
Yeah, but there's
And
a
then they
visa
walked
for
off.
that, Franklin. I don't want to hear that.
Oh, no.
We
and
have
then
visas
and
for
then
that.
they stayed.
Franklin,
That's part of the
tell
problem.
me this. I asked you this a year or so ago. I have a family that's been with me for years in my business. They're from Poland. He came through Canada legally. He's an engineer, worked here for 15 years before they were able to finally achieve their citizenship. What do you say to a family like that did everything right? They suffered, they struggled, they worked through the system of laws, which, that's another thing that you liberals do. You go, oh, we need a system. We have a system. We have a set of laws in place. There is a system for getting permission to come here. There is a system for legally being here. And there is a system for gaining your citizenship. What do you say to the family that worked 15 years to become U.S. citizens? We've decided that these guys who broke the law, who gamed the system, who did everything that you didn't do, we're just going to give them the same reward that you got. We're going to give them their
I haven't
citizenship.
heard anybody suggest that yet. Nobody has suggested
Let's see if we
that.
got a caller. Go ahead, caller, if you're still there.
Hey, Steve, Adam Lowe. How are you?
Hey, good, Adam. How are you, buddy?
Doing pretty good. I'm enjoying the show this morning.
Good.
I have a theory, and it constantly seems to be evidenced as we talk about things like immigration, abortion, issues like that. I think progress is never acceptable because there continues to be a faction of liberalism that demands absolute equality. So when people sit down at a table and we say, all right, we're willing to concede that people with high technical degrees who are foreign immigrants should be allowed admission into the United States, well, we're willing to concede that children who serve in the military who are immigrants should have citizenship. There's still a faction who says, well, if it's good for them, it's good for everybody, and that no one should be, that all situations are created equal. It's the same demand for equality we see in an issue like abortion when we say, well, we concede the fact that someone who was raped or a victim of incest or whose life is threatened should have an access to that procedure. And a faction of liberalism steps forward and says, but it should be equal. If they have access to it, everybody should have access to it. And that's where things like this that are highly controversial tend to break down, as people demand that purity and equality from that side.
I call it greed.
So,
I call that greed.
Well, it's just, and it's, I understand the sense of equality, but not all situations are created.
That's an interesting assertion, Adam, but let's use your example, though. There was a separate, wholly independent bill in the Congress for 5 years just dealing with the Dreamers.
Mm-hmm.
Never came up for a vote. Now, that didn't require agreement on the across the spectrum.
It never came up for a
Who
vote.
controlled the vote in the Senate?
But you know what else didn't come up for a vote? For years, we've allowed worker visas to be issued by a lottery. And time again, there have been bipartisan efforts to reform the worker visa lottery to give preference to those who have high technical degrees, established residency, property ownership in the United States. And still, we do it by lottery. And I have a very personal example of friends who had master's degrees on property right here in Bradley County, had to move to Toronto.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm working in a Boys and Girls Club.
It's totally illogical, isn't it?
An addict gets his worker visa. So there's been efforts, but what happens is this notion that things have to be absolutely equal continue to evade the discussion. I'll let you guys talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. You know, I don't know how we're going to get to the bottom of it. Like John says, there's laws in place now, but we're not following those laws. So we've got to extend the laws even more to try to make everybody happy. I don't know.
I'm going to repeat what I said. I think there are bipartisan majorities in both houses that would pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill now.
Well,
That's what I think.
John Boehner offered to have a vote, and the president shut him down. Thank you.
He could. He doesn't.
He offered to have a vote, and the president said, "I'm tired of waiting."
John Boehner did not need the president to bring up a bill for a vote in the House of Representatives.
Well, let me read what the speaker warned that unilateral action by the president on executive amnesty will erase any chances of doing immigration reform and will also make it harder for Congress and the White House to work together successfully on other areas where there might otherwise be common ground.
That's exactly what they said 2 years ago.
Well, but now, Franklin,
the president didn't do it by executive authority. And what happened?
You all had the House and the Senate in 2008, and you chose to spend all of your time on a health care takeover of 1/6 of the economy that nobody wanted, and you did it by lies and deception, and instead of passing something like immigration reform, which you could have. Well, now we have both houses, and John Boehner is offering to bring to bear our majorities to try and pass this for the American people, and the president is shutting him down.
Something to help millions and millions of citizens who didn't have health care.
By lying and deceiving them.
By lying and deceiving
Admission of his own experts.
I think the expert just came out and said that, didn't he?
By doing.
He absolutely
did. He not say that?
He wanted to do.
Well, wait a minute, Franklin. Let's make something clear. Did the expert that was helping Mr. Obama say that?
Yes, he did.
Okay, that's the end of that
segment.
Let's go on. The Congress is returning to Washington, D.C. right now. Several things that are going to be pending is requesting more money for to combat ISIS and Ebola, and also deal with an influx of unaccounted Central American children. That's some of the things that the first things that have to be addressed when they come back in. Even though we're getting ready for everything to change, now that the elections are over with, we've got to deal with some of these influx of the children coming in, Ebola.
I would assume that the additional funding for battling ISIS will pass on a bipartisan basis. Sure. I hope it does.
Yep.
I would assume that some additional funding on the Ebola response would come through. Seems to me to make sense to me. I'm not sure I know what the other issue is you're talking about. Central American children.
That's all these kids that have came across the borders, and they've been loading up on buses and taking them to communities and so forth.
And I'm wondering whether you looked that up, but there is a lot of concern that this enterovirus that is actually killing some children is actually being spread by the very same immigrant children that are being bused all around the country. Mm-hmm. Now Franklin rolls his eyes at me.
I'm not rolling my eyes. There's as you know, John, and you're supposed to be a law and order guy. There is a legal framework in place that you have to go through before you can deport people. That's
Franklin,
the law.
He took them from a containment facility in Texas and secretly bussed them all across the country without even notifying both Republican and Democratic governors that he had imported them into their states. And you don't seem to think that's a problem.
Why would he do that, Franklin?
If you will recall, there were a lot of Democrats and Republicans who were going ape over the fact that these kids were being hoarded into these hangars and so forth down there, and they didn't have the ability to do it.
And so secretly busing them out to hangars all around the country makes sense.
I'm sorry.
Without testing them for disease.
What is the problem with children?
They have the enterovirus, Franklin, and he may have spread it.
We already have the enterovirus in America,
He may have
John.
spread it through the use of taxpayer dollars.
I love
and you're
this.
not bothered by that.
I love this. He may have done
Franklin,
this.
this was not politicians that brought this out. It was doctors and epidemiologists that brought it out.
Mr. Obama's now calling for tougher internet regulations.
Well, of course he wants to. He's decided he wants to label it a utility so the government can take it over.
and
control it. Now, that's the same government that spied not only on American citizens, but apparently spied on the U.S. Senate.
What's your opinion of the FCC handling this?
Well, first of all, they regulate every other form of communication that we do. So I don't. That's the theory here, that it's now such a staple of our communication system that it shouldn't be totally unregulated. The other side of that is, and there's a lot of appeal to the notion that the internet is unregulated because it seems to be an incubator for innovation and development that way.
I think the reason you'll see a push to control it, because keep in mind, folks, when they say regulate, the taxes generally follow the regulation. But the real problem here is the internet has been a source of information for people outside of the three major networks that had an incredible liberal bias. And it's been really one of the sources for people to find out that the government was, in fact, lying to them and deceiving them. Like this University of Pennsylvania video that just came out of the Obamacare architect. 15 years ago, we would have never seen that.
What's interesting is the big proponents of what the president's talked about are lots of high-tech companies and lots of businesses who are pushing this.
That are also very liberal and were big supporters of the president, so they're not worried about the control. By the way, I want to get something in.
I'm not taking a position on this because I don't really know enough about it yet. I will have a position on it, but I need to learn more about it.
I want to get something in that really frustrates me. There were some huge historic changes that happened in the election 2 weeks ago. And apparently the media, when it's a Republican historic change, doesn't seem to be very interested in it. For example, we have elected now Elise Stefanik. She is the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, Republican from New York City. She's 30 years old, youngest person ever elected to Congress. We have elected Joni Ernst. She's the first woman senator elected from Iowa, and she's the first female combat veteran ever elected to the United States Senate. Republican. Mia Love is the first black woman elected to Congress from anywhere, and she's the first Haitian American elected to Congress from either party. And that's in Lily-White, Utah. Black Mia Love was elected in Lily-White, Utah. You've got Tim Scott. He is the first senator, black senator, elected from the South since Reconstruction as a Republican in South Carolina. He was also the previous two senators from the South were both Republicans, and the only other black senator elected in the North was Massachusetts Senator Brooks, and he was a Republican. He was appointed by Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, who was the first Indian female governor elected in the country, who, by the way, her Democratic opponent in her re-election campaign called her a whore a week before the election. And no national outcry from the National Organization for Women over that. No editorial in the New York Times over that, because he was a Democrat who called her a whore. Now, Tim Scott and Mia Love, the two black milestones in American politics, the NAACP issued a statement on the election, on the Wednesday after the election, didn't even mention either one of them. So the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People has two milestones that happen, and they don't even mention either one of them. That is hypocrisy at its greatest, and it is a disgusting comment on the state of liberal politics. We only like women, we only like minorities if you're our woman, our minority. Stay on the plantation, do what we tell you to do, or we won't support you.
Let's not get carried away, John.
Go ahead, Franklin. I'll let you wind it up.
First of all, I think it's a wonderful development that the Republican Party becomes more diverse. I think that will help the country.
We're more diverse than you all are right now.
That's hardly the case.
The first Vietnamese American was elected in Louisiana. Bobby Jindal was the first Indian American.
You want to compare numbers,
Actually,
John?
I would. We actually passed all of the civil rights legislation. You want to talk about Robert Byrd, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan?
John, if you want to compare numbers, then you're going to lose that debate.
No, actually, we won't. I'll be glad to bring that in. I will bring every bit of that in for you next week.
I would love to talk about what that election means, and let's talk about that.
All right, let's do it.
4 big-time Republican red states did what in this election? Voted to raise the minimum wage. Is your party going to get on board, John?
Well, obviously did, Franklin, in those states. That's
What
our
about
point.
nationally?
We actually
Those are
listen to
Republicans,
people.
John.
We don't lie
Guess
to
what?
them. We don't
Guess
deceive
what?
them, and we listen to them.
70% of the American people want to raise the minimum wage.
Well, guess what, Franklin?
Where's your party?
We're
on
a
it?
big
Get with
tent.
it.
We're a big tent party.
It's about time.
And we'll discuss lots of things, unlike you all.
What's to discuss? Do it. Do something. I'll repeat what I'll say over and over again. The American people want something done, and they'll take your party doing something over the system getting nothing done.
Which was
and
your
I
party.
understand that.
You know, we hadn't had a real good president since Reagan.
Is that right?
I think we need another Reagan.
Okay. Well, then we'll see what happens to federal spending then.
I
If it
guarantee-
goes up like it did under
Actually,
Reagan.
the Democrats were in charge of the spending under Reagan, and you know
the
that.
president signed the bill.
And the Democrats passed them.
Hey, folks, we have to wind it up for another week. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey.